Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Looks like we have a nice turnout. My name is Joe Agavino. I am Communications Director for Senator John Brooks, and tonight we are giving a presentation on alternative funding possibilities for public schools. This stems from a research project that we had done. We had started in 2020 during the pandemic. We were able to recruit a bunch of terrific, very sharp interns. The program itself did so well that we decided to extend it into the new legislative year, and we were lucky enough to bring in many talented academics, both in the undergraduate and graduate school level, that really just did an amazing job throughout the last several months. They were tasked with an assignment to put together a report analysis about public school funding in relation to property taxes and taxes in general and how to pay for it, with alternatives presented from different models across the country. Right now, I'm going to introduce Senator John Brooks. He will, to welcome you all.
Thank you, Joe, and good evening, everybody. Education, one of our top priorities. Both Senator Mannion and I are tied to education in different ways. My connection is through the school board, and Senator Mannion in the classroom. But we both recognize how critically important it is. One of our most important responsibilities in Albany to make sure that every student in the state of New York has access to a full quality education. One of the great challenges of that mission has been how we fairly fund education. We're in a state, there's three, if you will, oversimplified, three primary funding sources right now to education. One is state aid, one is commercial property taxes, and one is residential property taxes. And of course, in the city of New York and a few other areas, there's additional funding through local income taxes. But for different areas of the state, we have different economies that are in place. Some areas of our state are struggling, and they need a great deal of assistance from the state. Some areas have economic situations that are far from the best and need assistance that way. And in some areas of the state, we rely significantly on the use of residential property taxes. And how we evaluate those property taxes is a bit different from location to location. In many areas, the allocation or cost is allocated based on the assessed value of a home. In many cases, that assessed value is driven by the market value of a home. One of the problems that we have in funding education fairly is when we look at the market value of the home, that's effectively what the home could be sold for, but does not take into consideration the economic conditions of the homeowners of that home. And oversimplified, you could have a house, for sake of discussion, that's valued at $500,000. But the folks that are living in that home have a $450,000 mortgage. So while the house could sell for $500,000, their equity in the home, using that example, is just $50,000. So it's an area that we have to continue to work with. I introduced some legislation this year to put some caps on the maximum percentage that we can use residential property taxes to fund in education. But as we spoke with the interns we were going to be working with and the academic term, if you will, of this year, we gave a couple of groups some studies to make, and the group that we're going to be hearing from tonight is looking at school funding. So, I've got a bunch of ideas, and I know John, Senator Mannion has a bunch of ideas, and tonight we're going to hear from the younger and brighter side of the world, the students that were involved in this this program, and they're going to present ideas that we should take into consideration. So I am thrilled with what we're going to go through. As John had mentioned, you know, this is an opportunity to let the next generation have their say as we try to deal with this stuff. And we certainly know across this country, this younger generation has demonstrated its leadership on many issues, perhaps gun control being one of the most significant. We had the students down in Florida that came under attack, and they really got the country moving in a better direction. So tonight, I'm hoping that this is the start of the young folks giving us a better idea on how we can fairly, safely, and accurately fund education. So I'm looking forward to the report, and it's my pleasure to introduce a gentleman who is in his first session in Albany, but he's making a big impact, and he's someone I respect greatly, and someone who understands education quite well, and brings much to the discussion. So John, take it away.
Senator Brooks, thank you. And, you know, I admire you as well. I certainly appreciate your leadership in the Senate, and I appreciate you putting this together and highlighting such an important issue. I'd like to thank Mr. Agavino also for all of his work, and the interns. I don't want to talk for too long because I want everybody to have the opportunity to speak here, but a particular thank you to Alex and Arsh, who were helpful in getting me into this seat in 2020. So as Senator Brooks said, I've been a public school teacher for 28 years up until just December. And, you know, I see all the good that public education can do, but I also see the disparity. I just happened to be in a district the other day where their cost per pupil expenditures are $10,000 less than a neighboring district. And, you know, those kids deserve a high quality public education as much as the other kids. And it's just a challenge. But when I go door to door, when I was pursuing this, one thing I saw or I heard for sure from people either on the phones or at their doors previously was that, you know, their property taxes are high. And just as Senator Brooks alluded to, some people are in a different position than others as far as their income, where they sit in the equity of their home, and just, you know, where their home happens to be, which town. So I'm anxious to hear what everybody has to say. It's exciting for me to participate in this. I appreciate it. And I don't want to eat up any more time. So thank you for having me here tonight. And thank you for all the work that everybody has done ahead of time on this project. Thanks again.
Thank you, Senator Mannion and Senator Brooks. All right, to get things started, I would like to introduce to you now the team leader of this particular project, Mr. Max Wojcik. Max, take it away.
Thank you, everybody. Give me a sec to share the presentation. Let's see. All right, so today we are going to be talking about New York public education, residential property tax relief, and alternative sources of revenue. My name is Max Wojcik. I am the project team leader.
My name is Alex Turner. I focused on comparative district analysis.
My name is Jobim Steiermark, and I'll be walking through some data analysis that I did on trends in education funding in New York.
My name is Arsh Patel, and I'll be discussing the foundation aid formula.
I'm Sarah Gould. I'll be talking about alternative revenue streams.
And I'm Madeline Polovinsky, and I'll be talking about more alternative revenue sources.
All right, so to give a quick introduction to what we're going to be talking about tonight, I really want to frame the public education system in New York as fractured, unfair, and levying a disproportionate tax burden on homeowners. So as mentioned by Senator Brooks and Senator Mannion, public education in New York is primarily funded through real property taxation at the local level. And there's two inherent problems with this. The first thing, like Senator Mannion mentioned, it will create educational disparities across different districts. The simple logic of different districts being able to raise more money for themselves, hence creating better educational outcomes, is somewhat obvious. But then as well, it creates disproportionate tax burdens upon homeowners. In districts that have higher levels of residential property and less commercial property, a disproportionate tax burden will be drawn from those sources. And as Senator Brooks mentioned, he has introduced some legislation this term to try and solve this, including Bill S1388, which puts a 50% cap on the makeup of residential property taxes for a school district's budget. And this is really good because some districts, especially on Long Island and near New York City, currently see upwards of a 70% tax levy of residential property taxes in their school district budget, which we'll get into the actual numbers on that more, but it puts a very strong disproportionate burden on them. This bill would create about a $1 billion shortfall in local revenue, and we will be presenting alternative revenue sources that can be redistributed through state aid in the form of legalized marijuana, mobile sports betting, and district consolidation.
I wanted to begin by giving an overview of New York State's public education system. Max was just speaking about the fact that New York does not get the proper value out of its educational spending, and that varies from district to district with over 700 school districts, wide-ranging populations from smaller population districts to larger population districts. One important thing to note as well is that over 58% of students in the state of New York are economically disadvantaged. So tonight, as we sort of focus on these things, we want to focus on where we see large amounts of residential property tax relief burden, and then the ways in which we see that schools can approach that alternative funding. We also want to focus on the correlation to tax levy as a percentage of district budget. And as with everything tonight, we're taking a data-based approach to make sure that we can recommend things with the most clarity. Two particular school districts with high property taxes are Seaford Union School District and Malverne School District. These are two school districts which are heavily impacted by high residential property tax funding. The percentage funded by residential property taxes being 66% in Malverne School District and 69% in Seaford Union School District. These are really, really high numbers compared to some other districts in New York. And so it really points out the disproportionate nature of this funding across the state. So looking at the Seaford Union School District and the Malverne School District, we can take a look and see that with the residential property tax relief, we would see, for instance, in Seaford, the percentage funded by residential taxes decreased from 69% to 50%, and the same with Malverne, decreasing from 66% to 50%, which will help alleviate that burden somewhat, and will help those school districts going forward.
Okay, so now I'm gonna walk through some data analysis that will hopefully elucidate some disconcerting trends in New York's education funding. The first thing I'm gonna do is try to put New York in comparative perspective with other states to show that we're basically not getting the bang for our buck, as a couple of my colleagues have alluded to already. And then after that, I'm going to do sort of an inter-district analysis to show some of the underlying inequities that are still present in our school system, despite the fact that we have some solutions that try to address those. And so the first thing I'll point out here is just comparing New York to other states in the union. We are spending by far the most on our students out of any state, and yet our educational outcomes are sort of middling at best. So you can see at this graph on the x-axis here, there's just per pupil spending, so how many dollars we're putting into each student every year. And then on the y-axis, there's just the high school graduation rate for each state. And so you can see that New York is spending over 25 grand per student per year, and our graduation rate is below 87%. And there are other states that are spending far less that have higher graduation rates. The blue line is the line of best fit, which sort of shows where everyone should be if this were sort of a perfect relationship. And so that's obviously indicative of some sort of problem with the way that we're actually allocating our money. And so you can go to the next slide. This is a similar illustration. This just pits per pupil spending against the National Assessment of Educational Project math score for each state. So not quite as worrisome here, but still not super encouraging. We're again, funding is the same, but our math score is not really where it should be for how much money we're putting in. You can go to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk about just within New York State, some of the underlying inequities that are still showing up in the data, despite our best efforts to address some of those problems. So Arsh is going to talk more later about the funding formula, but we do have a funding formula that seeks to address these inequities, but there are certain problems with the way that it works, which basically means that students that have the most sort of demonstrated need aren't necessarily getting the resources they need to actually succeed in school. And the first thing that we have here is per pupil spending versus high school graduation rate. And what you'll notice is that there actually isn't a very strong correlation. There is a correlation, but it's rather weak. So this is because per pupil spending sort of masks, as a metric, it masks some of the underlying disparities that exist between districts. As I said, part of that is because we are giving money to districts that need more funds, but a part of it is also just that there are just differences in the way that school districts fund. So some school districts have transportation costs that add a huge amount to the budget, things of that nature. So this graph is a little bit deceptive, right? Because it doesn't seem like there's that big of a difference here. But if you go to the next graph, this shows the tax levy as a percentage of the district budget for every district versus that district's graduation rate. And so what's interesting about this is that it sort of reveals some of these inequities that are kind of masked when we look at the other data. So tax levy, as my colleagues have discussed, the better off a school district is, the higher the tax levy will be as a percentage of that district's budget. And so tax levy as a percentage of the budget is a very good proxy for a number of sort of attributes and characteristics about a district. Part of that is literally just raw money. How much money can the district raise? That is certainly one component of it. Another side of it is just sort of the level of poverty and the overall level of economic well-being in the district. So districts that are better off, kids tend to have more sort of extracurricular enrichment, things like that. Just their home situations are maybe more conducive to academic success, largely because of money. And so if we look at this, you can just see that districts that are able to pay their own way are performing significantly better. So the correlation is much stronger here than it is for just per pupil spending alone. And so you can go to the next one. And there's a similar, this is just another metric. So now we're looking at Algebra 1 Regents proficiency. I'm sure everyone here remembers taking the Algebra 1 Regents in high school. So again, there is a correlation when you just look at per pupil spending, but it's actually not quite as stark as you might expect. If you go to the next slide, the correlation, it becomes much starker when you actually look at the tax levy as a percentage of the district budget. So districts that are able to pay their own way, once again, we just see significantly better performance on average. And again, so the line of best fit there, it's a positive slope. We're seeing just much better performance as we have more funding coming from a local level. And the band represents the statistical sort of significance. So there's a very small band there. So it's a significant and very noticeable correlation. This is actually probably the most interesting of them all, I think, because this is the percentage of teachers that are inexperienced in a district. And so if you just look at per pupil spending in a vacuum, it doesn't look like there's really much going on here, just like for the other ones. If you go to the next slide, once you flip that on its head and look at tax levy as a percentage of the district budget, you can see that there is actually a significant correlation here. So districts that are able to pay their own way, fewer of their teachers are inexperienced, and that has real implications for student outcomes. So if you go to the next slide as well, this shows the relationship between the percentage of teachers that are inexperienced in a district and the high school graduation rate. So that just shows you that the more inexperienced teachers you have, the worse things are. And that shouldn't be very surprising, but it's just helpful, I think, to see it illustrated in that way. And so finally, just to kind of extract some key insights from all of that. So as far as the comparative perspective is concerned with other states, It's true that each state faces a unique set of challenges with respect to public education. So there are obviously different student bodies in different states, which have different needs. There are entrenched organizational structures that dictate how funds are spent. But it is pretty clear, just looking at the data, that New York could stand to benefit from some efficiency gains. And Madeline is going to discuss that later on in the presentation with some discussion about district consolidation, which would be a huge boon to our efficiency in the way that we manage this. As far as the inter-district analysis is concerned, it is hard to draw precise conclusions from the data, to be fair, and the academic literature is sort of notoriously convoluted about education spending and what sort of per pupil spending actually means and what we can do with it. But what we definitely can see is that the solutions that are in place right now are not adequate to address the underlying inequities that are present. And so what we need to do is move away from this fragmentary system where we're kind of constantly trying to play catch up with what each district needs, having everyone fund themselves, figuring out an aid formula. We need a system that is just more direct and ensures that students that have needs are getting those needs met with resources from the state. And Arsh is going to jump into that a little bit more right now with a discussion about some of the issues with the funding formula.
So I'm going to be talking about the foundation aid. As we all know, foundation aid spending formula is the primary way that the state of New York funds public education. However, it is inefficient and outdated. Because of the politically contentious nature of education spending, the formula has not been updated since its enactment in 2007. This in turn has exacerbated problems in education funding in the state. In the absence of any changes to foundation aid, local residential property taxes are the main ways school districts fund education, which has both been a burden on homeowners, as well as a major driver of education inequality in New York. This inequality has led to the disproportionate outcomes in district-level education results, such as the test scores that Joby mentioned earlier, as richer school districts can allocate more resources to education, whereas poor districts have more constraints. Alternative sources of school funding can be used to discuss education funding inequality in New York, as Sarah and Madeline will explain later. One of the key issues with foundation aid is the continued use of information from the student poverty count to 2000 federal census. This data is used to determine the values of the Pupil Needs Index, a variable in the formula which determines student poverty in each school district. This information was already 7 years old when foundation aid was enacted. However, over the last 2 decades, this information was never updated as demographics in New York changed. This has caused school districts where the overall population of impoverished students increased since 2000, not seeing an equivalent rise in foundation aid funding. Realizing the importance of this issue, the Cuomo administration recommended using figures from the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimate program of the Census Bureau to update the formula which measures median household income poverty for all school districts in the country. This update was done for the 2017-18 school year, but was not renewed in the following year. At this time, the formula reverted to using the 2000 year census information, which remains in place and is now 21 years out of date. Another issue with foundation aid is the using free or reduced price lunch program eligibility to determine student poverty. While this is a fairly common method of measuring student poverty in school spending formulas throughout the country, it is not the most effective method to determine student poverty. For example, a federal program that provided free lunch to all students in Schenectady made it harder for the district to determine how many students were eligible for the free or reduced price lunch program, which led to fears of underreporting and lowered foundation aid funds. One possible solution could be to use direct certification instead, which automatically counts students as eligible for free or reduced price lunch programs if their families are eligible for means tested programs such as SNAP or Medicaid. However, the only major problem with this is that information is not collected at the school district level. One other issue relevant to this is how, as a whole, poverty is measured in foundation aid. In the formula, poverty is treated as a one-dimensional issue, What this means is that the formula determines that the needs of all students who are considered poor are the same, whether students' family income is far below the poverty line or is right at the line, which I should note is approximately $21,000 for a family of four. This is misleading as those students who are in worse off circumstances will obviously need more state aid. One way that this problem can be fixed is by creating multiple variables for different categories of poverty. This was done in Pennsylvania's school spending formula, the fair funding formula, which takes into account the different needs of students living in poverty. It created three categories. The first including those students who are at or above the federal poverty line, but still in a relatively poor condition. The second being those students who live in acute poverty or below the poverty line. And third, those students who live in concentrated poverty, where at least 30% of the school district has students living below the poverty line. The methods that New York uses to measure student poverty within school districts need to be updated in order to make resource allocation more accurate. One last issue to consider regarding foundation aid is the issue of English language learner or ELL students. According to information collected by the New York Department of Education in 2014, ELL students had a dropout rate of 27.5%. The graduation rate for students enrolled in these programs was 29%, far behind the graduation rate of the general student population of 80.4%. Fortunately, we know that the students who were previously enrolled in ELL programs but have passed out of them by the time they graduate do so at a rate of 85.5%, higher than the general student population. What can we take away from this? That the ELL programs, when successful, have allowed students with limited English proficiency to catch up to their English-speaking counterparts and graduate on time. However, more aid needs to be dedicated to these programs within the foundation aid formula, particularly to high school level ones, so these students do not drop out from school and to ensure that they graduate on time.
Okay, so turning now to alternative revenue streams, we found that our research supported new funding opportunities that New York has recently chosen to explore. First of all, we started out by looking at the possibility of a recreational marijuana tax, which of course will soon come to fruition for New York State. And all projections indicated that New York should expect an additional revenue stream of between $90 and $95 million from that. This money is going to be generated through an excise tax, as other states have established. However, in looking at Colorado as one model, we found that the recent consumer behavior there has generated revenue far above and beyond their projected expectations. And so as you can see in this graph, revenue in Colorado has increased year over year. And so it's possible that New York's projections are also a bit too conservative. Colorado has also seen illicit sales of marijuana decrease in kind as its revenues have increased. And in terms of how this can be successfully implemented in New York, it's going to be essential for legal businesses to be able to compete price-wise with illicit sellers. But the tax rate has to be considered in addition to other factors, such as licensing fees, caps on licenses, consumer access, and enforcement. One factor that's going to be subject, or that should be subject to reevaluation along the way, is the notion of a potency-based tax. New York is one of only 2 states currently with a potency-based tax, so it remains to be seen whether consumers will be deterred from purchasing products with a high THC content as a result of that tax. Also, testing for THC content is notoriously difficult because of the variability within crops. And so we found that the average variability is up to 5 percentage points, which means consumer trust is going to be essential in the testing process for generating buy-in for this. Since we can anticipate questions about how the state will measure THC content, New York can ensure fast, accurate results for testing by establishing a network of reliable labs and by establishing verifiable testing procedures, which will also help prevent administrative backlog as a result of all of this needing to happen within state. And in other promising news for education funding, New York State also recently legalized mobile sports betting, which should be even more lucrative for schools than the marijuana excise tax. While the exact number has yet to be decided, the state is going to tax gross gaming revenue not less than 12%. And Senator Adobo plus the state controller DiNapoli have both found that New York can expect to bring in about 99 million as a result of this in the next fiscal year. Of course, that figure will increase, climbing gradually every year to eventually reach 493 million for fiscal year 25-26, all of which is to say that New York will see an overall increase in education funding for this next fiscal year of 11%.
An additional source of revenue to help fund education while offering property tax relief will actually be by reducing costs through strategic school district consolidation and encouraging service sharing between districts. In our research, we found that the optimal size for school districts to operate most efficiently is between 2,000 and 4,000 students per district. This number does vary by geography, demographics, and other factors, but most estimates are in this range. And this graph displays the distribution of district size in New York State. The blue slice indicates districts that are over 2,000 students, which is the minimum efficient size, and all shades of red signify districts under 2,000 students, which is, again, the minimum efficient size. So this means that nearly 2/3 of New York school districts are operating below their most efficient size. And many are even below 500 students per district, which indicates that school district consolidation may yield significant cost savings if we get these districts up to a more efficient size. Next slide. So we propose two measures to reduce costs in district funding through consolidation and service sharing. So first, we propose a committee on district consolidation and service sharing. And this committee will evaluate New York school districts and identify those that would be good candidates for consolidation. Currently, consolidation only occurs when district administrators decide to initiate the process themselves. But because school district consolidation will eliminate two separate administrations, administrators have little incentive to attempt consolidation. But by allowing the committee to initiate this process, we will see consolidation when it benefits all constituents of a region, not just the administrators. Furthermore, this committee will standardize the procedures to ensure consolidation is fair and that no district exploits another. So currently, in order for consolidation to pass, districts or each district must have majority support for consolidation. So that's a majority of voters in each district. But with the Committee on District Consolidation and Service Sharing already standardizing mergers and ensuring fairness, we propose in changing the final vote for consolidation to require majority support across all merging districts rather than separate majorities in each district. So this will ensure that consolidation occurs when it benefits an entire region rather than letting a minority district derail a process with widespread benefits. And again, the committee will prevent exploitation. So in addition to reducing the barriers to consolidation as well as enforcing fairness, this committee will also, or we expect this committee to recommend the consolidation of administrations, but not the schools themselves, because consolidating just administrations will reduce overlapping layers of administration, thus reducing costs. And it's also associated with fewer adjustment costs, such as increasing transportation costs and loss of community identity. So when it's not feasible for geographic reasons or other reasons, the committee will also recommend boards of cooperative education services, otherwise known as BOCES, for certain regions. BOCES allow districts to share services even if they don't consolidate, which can promote flexibility and autonomy in districts while lowering costs of providing education. BOCES have been particularly successful with measures like pooled transportation systems or the joint purchasing of equipment and materials to save costs. And this committee will standardize the process of forming BOCES just to smooth that process and reduce administrative red tape. And we expect BOCES to provide either better educational resources at a lower cost, thus saving money, or provide much better educational resources and thus better educational outcomes without increasing costs. Our second plan is to propose funding incentives for consolidation and service sharing. So currently, New York State provides a 40% increase in state aid for districts that consolidate, which lasts for 5 years before it begins to diminish. While our proposals hopefully will minimize adjustment costs, school district consolidation still does incur some adjustment costs, which persist for up to 10 years, potentially more after consolidation. So we propose extending the period of time over which districts will receive that additional funding, so we can make the current funding incentives more effective. They will not only cover the adjustment costs that are incurred with merging, but they will also provide additional incentives for consolidation, so they will operate more effectively and actually encourage districts to consolidate. We also suggest that New York State provides financial incentives for the creation of BOCES programs by providing 15% of the funding for all participating districts in extra aid directly to that BOCES. So based on our research, next slide. Based on our research, our plan will maximize the benefits of consolidation while minimizing the costs. So first and foremost, our plan will streamline district administration, reducing overlapping layers of administration between schools and administrations, and thus save costs. Our plan will also increase districts' purchasing power when we consolidate small districts into more average-sized districts. So districts will be able to purchase materials and services at a lower cost. Consolidation and BOCES will also facilitate resource sharing and specialization, which will again lower costs while providing better education opportunities. And finally, our plan will minimize adjustment costs because we are advocating a flexible approach rather than like uniform consolidation, and also because we are primarily focusing on the consolidation of administrations, not schools themselves. So schools will remain small and more conveniently located, so transportation costs won't increase. And because schools will remain separate, communities will still have their local school as sort of a focal point for community identity. So this quote from research on district consolidation in New York State found that all else equal, doubling enrollment in a district cuts operating costs per pupil by 61.7% for a 300 pupil district and by 49.6% for a 1,500 pupil district. So taken together, our plans for establishing a committee and additional financial incentives, we believe will generate effective consolidation and save costs. And even considering adjustment costs, and even when we use high estimates for those adjustment costs, we expect our recommendations to generate significant net cost savings, which we estimate to be between 14.4% and 31.5%. We also think that this measure will work well with policies to shift the burden of funding education off local tax bases, because differences in local tax bases historically have really complicated plans to merge districts and have generated lots of support for consolidation, generated lots of opposition to consolidation. So by removing that as an issue, we can expect to see more support for consolidation. And not only that, but district consolidation will also reduce inequalities in resources available to fund schools and thus promote equity in education.
Cool. So as we wrap up here, there's really three main points that I'd like to stress. So first, alleviating residential property tax burdens on homeowners is an important educational reform that can be taken outside of the classroom. It's kind of one that gets left out of educational discourse a lot. So making sure that even those people who don't either have kids in school or aren't attending school are still participating in a fair and equitable education system. As well, many alternative revenue sources exist We presented 3 here today in the form of recreational marijuana, mobile sports betting, and district consolidation. But we advocate for any alternative revenue source that is equitable, fair, and provides any additional money to the state of New York for public education. And finally, changes to the funding formula are essential as well. Arch did a lot of really good research on them, and while they are politically controversial, if our funding formulas are not changed, then any additional money that is added will be going to the wrong places. So those are essential as well, despite their controversial nature. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Max and team, for a very interesting and intensive presentation. I will just remind folks that this was a research project, an independent research project that these students were tasked with, and they spent the last several months working towards looking into various different models and alternatives to funding to present what they gave you here today. If you have a question, if anyone has anything they'd like to sort of jump in with, you can either use the raise your hand function or put something in the chat. I can start here. There is a question from Mr. Fred Harrison. Is there any precedent for dedicating a revenue stream like sports betting, marijuana excise taxes to schools previously? Are you aware of any?
Sarah, I think you can probably take that one.
Yeah, sure. There is some precedent, and we did look at states that had already done this prior to New York legalizing marijuana as well. The precedent is not old, admittedly. It only goes back to 2014. So we looked at all of the states that were in play here. We saw that Colorado had done it especially well, which is why we highlighted that in the presentation. California, however, had done it especially poorly, and so we didn't choose to include that. So yes, there are currently 16 states that are working on setting the precedent, and also DC.
Senator Mannion, did I see you raise your hand there?
I'm good. I think Sarah did a great job there.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. We got another question here. How large is the, Mr. Paul Ross is asking, how large is the student population in a typical K through 12 district in other states of the country? Did you find any disparities or differences when you were looking into that?
Yeah, so it was hard in my research to find like an average number across all of the United States, and I'm not sure that that number would be particularly or would be super relevant to New York, because a lot of school district size depends on geography. So in a really, and also population density. So in Wyoming, the school district population size would be much lower, because you can't expect students to like drive an hour and a half to school. So I think it depends a lot based on like what state you're talking about. And so it was hard to find an actual average in across all of the United States. But I will say that there is there's a great amount of range in how other students organize their school district size. So many states, particularly states with more rural areas, have very, very small school districts, in part because of the transportation issue. But many of those are still sort of below the size that would be most efficient. And then there are other states that are sort of on the opposite end. I believe North Carolina was experimenting with like a county-wide school district, which is very, very big, and sort of spans more territory than like any school district that I am aware of otherwise. So I think I don't know what an average is, but there is a lot of range. So yeah.
Actually, if I could just jump in as well, I believe that Hawaii actually only has one school district for the entire state, which is obviously a pretty radically different setup than what we have in New York. And I don't think we would anticipate anything like that anytime soon, but it's just interesting because they do see some benefits from that. Just being able to implement policies much more directly and efficiently, the state having more negotiating leverage with respect to unions, et cetera. So that is just one other piece of information that might be food for thought for people.
Thank you. Frank M. Voles, Jr., I see you have your hand up. Well, we can open up your mic if you'd like to ask your question.
Just gave him permission.
Mr. Voles, all you have to do is just unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question. Okay, well, I believe you wrote it.
How's
Oh,
that?
there you
Can you hear me
are.
now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, super. Yeah, I was just wondering, will district consolidation have an emphasis on location or physical implications or educational excellence?
Yeah, so I can take this one. I think our answer is that the committee will take into account all of those. So some states have experimented with sort of across the board consolidations of schools under a certain size or schools under a certain size with certain geography. And we do not recommend such an approach because some of the studies on school district consolidation and district consolidation in New York State found that sort of indiscriminate district consolidation or a one-size-fits-all approach often incurs more costs than benefits. So you don't actually see a reduction in costs. So we would want district consolidation to occur pretty much only on a case-by-case basis because we don't want to impose consolidation when it wouldn't be efficient or when it would cause more problems than it would solve.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Anyone else? Senator Brooks, did you want to jump in? You're on mute, sir.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm trying not to get involved in this discussion because these are the reports, but I just want to chime in for a second on the concept of consolidation itself. And for many, it's a dirty word. And as we've looked at, there's different ways to look at consolidation. And one of the ways, and it was touched on in this presentation, is we consolidate administrative functions. And you can get to a situation where you have a centralized administration district that provides the administrative duties for multiple districts. So you still have the identity of the local district, but you have the planning done at a larger scale, the purchasing, the hiring, the salary administration, et cetera, as a different scale. So I think we've got to recognize that consolidation of school districts have many meanings, and the one that I've personally advocated for in the past is the consolidation of the administrative function. So you still have all of the, if you will, the benefits of the local school district, but you have also benefit of the savings by consolidating different functions, getting the efficiency of those functions, the buying power, and the rest. So I just want to make that point, and I'm trying not to get involved in the rest of the session to let our interns explain their thinking, and then maybe at the end I'll make a couple of points. But because the consolidation is unique, and I think they recognize that, and the discussion that was going on, and how would that consolidation be done at the administrative side, to the greatest extent, maybe oversimplified, the function from one district to the next administratively is common or similar. And if you're going to purchase a textbook, just for example, you can negotiate if you're purchasing textbooks for 20,000 students, you can get a better deal than you can for 2,000 students and that type situation. But I'm purposely trying to stay out of this discussion. I'll say something at the end because, you know, the whole objective here was to let our interns look at this from their vantage point and not be force fed. You have to think this way and that way. That's not the way I wanted to look at this. And I wanted them to have an opportunity. I'll make some comments at the end, but I just think we've got to recognize that consolidation in particular can have multiple meanings. And in some situations, people can think we're trying to erase a school district, not necessarily. And in some situations, people can have the impression that we're going to take away all the benefits of a local school district. That's not necessarily the case. So I'll stay out of it the rest of the discussion, but I just think it was important to recognize that consolidation can have many meanings, and then we'll take a look at that. So I thank you.
Thanks, sir. Of course, a very important point, and I will reiterate that this is an independent research study that we put these guys on. So, you know, as the senator said, that we wanted them to approach this from an entirely unspoiled viewpoint. We have a question here from Paul Ross asking about any concerns over alternative revenue sources, sports gambling, marijuana being regressive in nature. Is there anyone can respond to that? Sarah, any thoughts? Calling you out.
I wasn't sure if that was a question for us or for the senators on the call, but you know, I guess I would say this is all new to New York State. The rules are all being written. So I did mention as part of my presentation that you know, we should consistently evaluate and assess along the way to make sure what New York is doing is working for everybody and is fair for everybody. So in terms of concerns about it being a regressive tax, I guess I would have to say, well, you know, we'll have to kind of just see how this plays out. But if you're concerned about it being a regressive tax, I encourage you to reach out to your representatives, Paul.
Thank you, Sarah, very much.
All
right, we are coming up on our.
I did have one thought to just add to that, if I may. So I think one thing that's interesting about marijuana taxes and sports gambling is that they're a little bit different from other regressive taxes in the sense that they are not something that is sort of affects everybody on an involuntary basis. So if you think about tolls, for example, tolls are a regressive tax. Everybody has to drive on the road. Everybody pays tolls. Not everybody has to smoke marijuana. Not everybody has to engage in sports betting. So in that sense, it's a little bit different, I think, and shouldn't necessarily be conflated with other regressive taxes because it is much more voluntary. So that's what I would say to that.
All right, Mr. Ross seems to think you made a very good point. So thank you very much, Sheldon. All right, I think we're just about at our hour mark, therefore, we are done with our questions. So if I'd like to hand it over, Senator Mannion, if you had anything you wanted to jump in, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Brooks.
I'll be brief. Just appreciate everybody's work on this. And, you know, I will say that some of the points that were made, especially when it comes to teachers being able to be recruited and retained by districts that are at the wrong end of the formula or have, you know, other economic challenges is real. And it's highly disruptive to that school climate. I'm glad that came out in the presentation. And of course, that's something that we got to make better. And, you know, the solutions that were proposed are greatly appreciated. And I think will be very helpful in keeping the discussion going. Thanks for having me here tonight.
Thank you for joining us, Senator. Yeah, and I will just once again simply say that this, you know, agree with Senator Manning. This is an ongoing discussion, and tonight's presentation was designed to express different and alternative ideas on how to solve an obviously very complicated problem. So we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Senator Brooks, I will pass it off to you for any closing remarks you'd like to. Oh, Senator, I'm sorry, you're on mute again.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks to all of the students who participated in this program. I think you made a lot of good points. I want to address a few things that that maybe weren't there for a minute, and not meant in a condemning way at all, because there's a lot of things we've got to take into consideration. One of the things we're seeing as a problem in many of the districts here on Long Island, where there are a large number of school districts, is the ability or lack of ability to have a commercial property tax base. We have some communities that half of their educational costs is funded by a commercial property tax base. And many of those districts have a very enhanced program. You know, the whole idea of the proposal we made of capping property taxes at 50% is to establish a maximum. Then they have to get some assistance. You know, as we look at the way we tax, one of the prime reasons that we have made such heavy use of residential property taxes is for the simple reason you got to pay it. If you don't pay it, we'll take your house. So it's not something you can find some ways around. It's not the best reason you want to use, but it's a situation. And property taxes become regressive when you take into consideration, and we're seeing a little less of this than in the beginning, but when you bought a house, the objective was to someday own that house free and clear, and your family would live there forever and ever. We've become a lot more mobile. But what we see, and what we're seeing in our district in particular, is many of the districts, many of the homeowners have been in the district for 40, 50 years in the homes. And the houses have appreciated greatly in value, but their incomes are fixed or going down because as we move into our senior years, obviously our income comes down and it becomes a struggle for them to get the houses. The other thing is that as the value of houses have gone up so much, and you know, you bought a house, let's say for $200,000, just for a number, and you're going to pay that over 40 years in your plan, but what you end up paying for that house is $800,000 or $900,000 because of the tremendous interest cost. And sometimes we look at a house transaction and say, wow, I bought the house for, we'll say 200 just for a number, and I sold it for 500. I made $300,000. No, you probably lost money when you look at the interest that you had to pay and the other expenses. But you know, I think what we have to do is put together a pie, if you will, of sources of funding for education, and just not put too much dependence on one issue, unless maybe that issue is state assistance, and then state assistance we can fund more fairly than we do the others. I think you did a good job. I think a very good job. I don't mean to take that lightly. I think we're seeing, and you touched on it in several places, but immigration has got a tremendous cost factor for many districts. We have one district, in our district in particular, that really has really put that district in a tremendous financial bind because of the situation. Students with disabilities. You know, it's funny, I can't speak for up in John's neck of the woods, but here on the island, we have many students that are special ed students, and not every district has the same program for students in need of additional assistance. And they become almost a transient population. If a school district enhances its special education program, people will move to that district to take advantage of that. Some of these special educational programs for some students cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're in a situation today where that money doesn't move with the student. And all of a sudden the school district has a tremendous financial burden because they enhanced the program and picked up 25 additional students with high need because it looks like they're doing attention. It's something we have to look at. I think you did a great job with BOCES related things. I think it's a tremendous tool that we have to make good use of. And I think we have one of the problems we have with school funding in the end is whatever it is, it's got to be dependable. And realistically, in the last year where we went through the pandemic, or the last year and a half, many homeowners and other people have great financial burdens right now. And I don't think everybody's going to be in a position where they can pay their full taxes right now. Some of them are going to be behind, and that's going to present a problem. So the one thing, whatever we do with funding, we've got to make sure it's dependable. And it's also going to mean, and we'll use the gambling money just as an example, we're making some estimates on what's going to happen there. I think they're conservative estimates, and I think they could go higher. And on the marijuana sales, as we all know, that there's a concept out there of what's going to happen, but there's still a lot of things that have to be put in place, and we're not sure how dependable that is. But I think we do have to look at multiple sources, and we're going to see as different opportunities come around with programs where we may get some contribution from different areas. But I think you know, and then you talked about the employment of the staffing in the districts and how that happens. I can't speak for upstate, maybe John can, but I think in many ways, some school districts over the years become family, meaning somebody gets hired to be a teacher in a school district, and they fall in love, for lack of a better word, of the environment of that school district, how they go about things, how they approach education. And they want to make that their career. They don't shop districts through their educational career. They get someplace that feels like home. And then they contribute it and try to make the educational programs there better and better and better and better. And they grew up with the kids. They're a coach to the kids, if you will, as they go through. So I think that's one of the great things with some of the school districts. You become part of something that's real. So I compliment you for what you did. I tried to stay not away from it that I wasn't interested, but I was not trying to influence what you were looking at. I wanted you to look at it and say what you have. As you know, I've done a lot of work in this area, and we're dealing with some school districts. We worked hard to get a monitor program introduced in the state of New York because we had a district that's what it desperately needed. And we prevailed finally to get 2 monitors in Long Island put in place initially, and that's been expanded to 2 other programs. And I will tell you, I met with the monitor and the school superintendent yesterday. They're making real progress. So it's good. So I think this is a start of a discussion we have to work on and open up to more people. Part of the budget, the legislation that I introduced, while that hasn't been approved yet, but I'm still pushing on it. We did get in the budget a study that's going to take a look at school funding, which I think is important, and we have to be open. So I thank you for what you did. And I thank you for the approach, and I think you hit on a lot of good points. And I think the sharing, when I was in the school board in the 90s, we were doing sharing with local districts because you just can't afford everything, and you can share stuff. But we need to do more of that. And I want to give John an opportunity to say anything he might want to say additional, because I made some references to upstate, and I think. Well, I don't pretend to understand the situations in all the districts. I know the districts are very different, and there's a perception in Long Island that we have polo teams as part of our sports programs, which of course is not the case. But I do want to give John a chance to make a couple of comments. But once again, I want to thank all of you for the effort that you put in this, and the fact that you tried to take a very, very broad look at this. And I think you did a great job. John?
Just to comment on what you said a little bit more, Senator, is absolutely right. You know, I think there's a lot of similarities between your region of the state and mine, but we certainly have our love of our school districts. again, we have had consolidation up here, but as you can imagine, sometimes that does come with some resistance because people just love their school district. But we've seen it work too. We've seen it work and we've gotten over the line. And I do agree with you that, people find a district and often call it home, move their families into the district, et cetera, et cetera. So, I agree with you. It was a great discussion tonight and an important one. And I appreciate everybody's work on it and you making this a priority for everyone, because it certainly is an issue up here as well. We need to do better.
All right, and to well, we don't see Trent tonight. Brianna, I again appreciate your work, and Max taking leadership on the committee. I appreciate your work, and I think this discussion, assuming you guys stick around with this is going to continue. We're going to keep an ongoing discussion about education and the fundings and what we're going to try to do. But we recognize too that New York is a very unique state. There's probably 5 or 6 different economies in the state of New York where places are. And we've got to recognize sometimes what's good in one place doesn't work in another and vice versa. But what I'll say for all of you is the money where you went to school was well spent, because you've shown some pretty fine analysis here. So whatever we spent on you in education wasn't money wasted. And I'm kidding when I put it that way. But the point is that you were prepared to take a look at a very important question. And made a very good analysis and very good points. And we're going to continue to drill on those as we try to reform education. And then, we have to recognize, and we saw again, this pandemic showed us how fast the economy can change. But look at what we did. We adjusted to the distance learning. So what did we eliminate by distance learning? No more school days. We figured out how to teach our students. Now this frowns on many faces because you needed to snow day. But the point of the matter is, we recognize, particularly in a hazardous situation, we don't have to put the students and the buses on the road. We have a way to continue education during the process. So I thank you all. We'll continue talking, and I hope the folks that joined in got something out of it. And any recommendations they may have, they can forward it in, and we'll take a look at that. And after those recommendations come in, maybe we'll shoot them back to you guys and give you a chance to tweak things if you think that's necessary. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Brooks. Thank you, Senator Mannion. I'd also like to thank the entire team here who put in a lot of hard work and effort here. And for those of you that joined us tonight, again, thank you for your time and consideration. If you have further questions or would like to find out more about the the research that was compiled, just feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us at Brooks, BROOKS, at nysenate.gov. Brooks at nysenate.gov. You can, and of course, you can reach out to us on our through our website or at our office. And so I will now wrap things up and just say thank you. Have a great night and a wonderful weekend.